Hey everybody, I'm Christy Jordan with southernflight.com and I'm so excited to be bringing you another storytime video today. Before we get started on our story, can you wave at me? Thank you! I love it when you wave at me. Now today's story is a very special one because you're going to enjoy it, but you know what? If you have a mom or dad or grandmama or granddaddy or aunt or uncle around there, they might like this story even more than you do because it talks about times when we were growing up as children. Times when probably your grandma and granddaddy were little, your mama and daddy were little. I remember these times when I was a child too. So it just speaks reminisce is when you think back to your childhood, the days that you're living now. And they're going to enjoy the reminiscing of it. Now, there's a couple things in the story that I need to explain to you ahead of time because you may not understand them. One is a Johnny house. They talk about a Johnny house. Back in the old days, houses did not have bathrooms in them. Houses were outside. You would basically dig a hole in the ground and build a little house around it. And for a lot of reasons, which you can ask an adult about, you did not want the outhouse to be close to your house. So they would put it like up on a hill or far away from the house. And so if you had to go use the bathroom at night, you would have to walk out there in the dark all the way. And a lot of kids didn't want to go by themselves. So you'll notice that the main character in this story, her grandmother holds her hand and takes her there. Another thing you need to know is the grandfather in this story works in the coal mines, and he comes home completely covered in black dust. People that worked in coal mines, they had to go way down in the ground in caves, and they had to use axes and things and hit these rocks to get these parts of rocks off. It was coal, and it was really black. And if I was in the coal mine all day, at the end of the day, I would just be completely black as night, and you'd be able to see my eyes and my teeth, and that was it. It was just covered in black. And so it was very hard work, and it took a lot of baths to be able to get all that off at the end of the day. Back then, hard work was different from what it is now for a lot of people. Our parents and, people work really hard now, but we go and we sit down at desk and we answer all these phone calls, and we've got email messages and text messages, and we have all these things stressing our brain out. Back then, it was hard work, like physically. You would work all day. You'd be, swinging an axe, trying to get coal out, or, carrying heavy stuff. My ancestors used to work all day in the blazing sun out in the fields, picking cotton. And you would get so tired, it's what they call bone tired, where you were just tired all the way down to your bones. But the thing about being bone tired is you would come home and you sit down and your body just says, ugh. But your head was still alert and you weren't stressed out in your head like people are nowadays. And then your kids would come around and they'd be excited to see you at the end of the day and they'd want to talk to you. And so it just made your heart kind of happy. Your body's resting and relaxing. There's a certain kind of rest you can only get when you're bone tired. And then your heart is happy because you get to spend that time with your family. In the evenings, you didn't come home and have the TV on or the radio on and kids weren't playing video games. You walked into a quiet house and kids would say, "Daddy, Daddy," or "Mama, Mama." Well, Mama's usually stayed home. And they were excited to see you. And you would sing songs. Sometimes you would sit out on the porch and shuck corn or, work on vegetables from the garden. Sometimes people would whittle. In this story, the grandpa sharpens the kids' pencils with his knife. My granddaddy and my daddy used to do that for me. And it was just it was a different way of living. It was a very simple way of living. A lot of us may not ever know what bone tired feels like. And if you don't ever know what bone tired feels like, you don't ever know what a good night's sleep feels like. I have been bone tired before. Right before I was starting college, I took an extra job in the evenings and on the weekends to try to get as much money as I could. And I worked in the office during the day, and then I worked out in an outdoor job in the evenings and weekends. And I would come in late at night and walk in the back door and sit down in a chair in this living room and just fall asleep. I'd be so tired. But it's a different way of living. It's good for your heart. And sometimes this book is about remembering those times. So I've talked enough. I will get on with the book. This is called When I Was Young in the Mountains. It's by Cynthia Rylant, and it's illustrated by Diane Good. And she dedicated it to her grandparents. Grandparents are very special people. When I was young in the mountains, Grandfather came home in the evening covered with the black dust of a coal mine. Only his lips were clean, and he used them to kiss the top of my head. When I was young in the mountains, Grandmother spread the table with hot cornbread, pinto beans, and fried okra. Look at that. Now that is some of the best food around. I'm going to tell you what, if you've never had hot cornbread, pinto beans, and fried okra, you need to ask somebody to cook it for you as soon as possible. It beats anything on the McDonald's menu. Later, in the middle of the night, she walked through the grass with me to the Johnny house and held my hand in the dark. I promised to never eat more than one serving of okra again. You'll have to ask your mama to explain that one to you. When I was young in the mountains, we walked across the cow pasture and through the woods carrying our towels. The swimming hole was dark and muddy, and we sometimes saw snakes, but we jumped in anyway. Look at that. Now let me tell you something about mountain people. Mountain people understand snakes. They know what is a good snake and what is a bad snake. This is 2012 and you're not mountain people. If you ever see a snake, get away from it. Consider it a bad snake. On our way home, we stopped at Mr. Crawford's for a mound of white butter. Mr. and Mrs. Crawford looked alike, and they always smelled of sweet milk. Sweet milk is what old folks call white milk. And if you ever wonder why they call it sweet milk, just take a big old swig of buttermilk and then a big old swig of white milk, and you'll understand. When I was young in the mountains, we pumped pails of water from the well at the bottom of the hill and heated the water to fill round tin tubs for our baths. See, they didn't have water indoors. It was a pump outside, and you had to carry it all the way up the hill. Afterward, we stood in front of the old black stove, shivering and giggling while Grandmother heated cocoa on top. And that's some of the best kind of cocoa, too. We call it hot chocolate. When I was young in the mountains, we went to church in the schoolhouse on Sundays and sometimes walked with the congregation through the cow pasture to the dark swimming hole for baptisms. My cousin Peter was laid back into the water and his white shirt stuck to him, and my grandmother cried. Now that's a good kind of crying. Sometimes your heart gets to filled up so much with joy and happiness that it makes your eyes leak. When I was young in the mountains, we listened to frogs sing at dusk and awoke to cowbells outside our windows. Sometimes a black snake came into the yard, and my grandmother would threaten it with a hoe. My granny did that many times. You'd be out tending your garden, and see, that's the hoe. That's the garden thing you would use to help break up the dirt. If it did not leave, she used that hoe to kill it. My grandmother did that a lot too. 4 of us once draped a very long snake, dead of course, across our necks for a photograph. That sounds like something that my ancestors would have done. Again, don't ever touch a snake. When I was young in the mountains, we sat on the porch swing in the evenings, and Grandfather sharpened my pencils with his pocket knife. Grandmother sometimes shelled beans and sometimes braided my hair. The dogs lay around us, and the stars sparkled in the sky. A bobwhite whistled in the forest. A bobwhite is the name of a bird, and it sounds like bob bob white, bob bob white. So that's why they call it that. So this is what people used to do. We called it porch sitting. It's what you do in the evening. Go sit out on the peaceful porch and listen to the crickets and the birds and just talk to each other and visit. When I was young in the mountains, I never wanted to go to the ocean. I never wanted to go to the desert. I never wanted to go anywhere else in the world, for I was in the mountains, and that was always enough. Isn't that a beautiful story? I love that story. We all have certain places that our heart calls home. And I think my heart, I think some of it may have to do with our ancestors, where their hearts have called home. Sometimes we may be born with it. Wherever you live, if you live near the beach, your heart's probably going to always long for the beach and always consider that home. If you live near the desert, your heart will consider that home. My heart is used to seeing rolling hills covered in green and green trees, green everywhere. And so I don't like going to the beach. And I've never even considered going to the desert. I like being right where I am. I'm more mountain people myself, and so that's what my heart calls home, and that's where I'm content for. This is a great story to talk to your mama or daddy or grandma and granddaddy about, and ask them what things were like growing up for them. Did they have an outhouse? Did they have a water pump? What did they do in the evenings? Did they sit on the porch? Find out what they did instead of watching TV or playing video games. You know, we didn't have computers, but there were all kinds of wonderful things to do then. So find out and ask them about that. And a very important thing to remember is that if an older person sits down to talk to you and tell you a story, the most important thing you can do is just be quiet and listen to every single word and try to remember it, because you're young now and you're about to go off and live this big old life, and you've never done that before, and they have. So they have a lot of the answers that sure would help you out if you knew them before you went off. They can help you make the right decisions. They can help you lead the life you want to lead, and they can help you make sure that you're happy and joyful as you go out into the world. Just a lot of wisdom there. It's kind of like if you're thirsty and you're standing next to a well is where water comes from. There's this big well, and there will be a bucket, and you can lower the bucket in there and bring it up, and the bucket will be full of delicious sweet water that you can drink. So if you're thirsty and you're standing next to a well, you're going to get a drink. It's the smart thing to do. Well, somebody that's older than you, they're your well. If you're standing next to them, learn what you can, because I promise you'll get some wisdom in it. I know this is a bit of a different story for us. I think the adults are going to really love it, and I hope you get to find out what it was like when your people were young, where they lived, and what it was like. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I hope to read you another Storytime video soon. I love you very much, and I'll see you on southernplate.com. Bye-bye.